Society for Vascular Surgery, under the leadership of Richard Cambria and Peter Glavitsky, has initiated audiovisual interviews with pioneers of vascular surgery. This part of an effort by SVS to develop archives to preserve the history of SVS as well as vascular surgery as a specialty. A committee was formed called the History Project Work Group, which was chaired by Jimmy Yao, with Norman Rich and myself as members. Because of the workload, an expansion of this committee was needed. William Baker, Mark Eskandari, Walt McCarthy, William Pierce, Melina Kibbe, Peter Lawrence, and Ken Cherry were added. Today, we will be interviewing the internationally famous surgeon Jacob Buth to this illustrious group. To date, we have interviewed 69 international and national surgeons from the United States. Dr. Buth, thank you for agreeing to this interview today.
Well, thank you for inviting me here.
Let's start from your early years. Tell us where you were born and when.
I was born in 1944, the last year of World War II. My father was a general practitioner in a small town on the islands in the southwest of the Netherlands. So it was an isolated island with about 10 small towns, and it remained isolated until after a flooding in '53, and it was first in 1960 that had a fixed. It had a bridge, actually, a dam that connected it with the mainland. So it was. My youth was signified by ferries to go to Rotterdam or to the mainland. I still like water a lot.
Tell us about the influence that your parents had on you as a young child.
Both had, in their own right, a lot of influence on me. My mother, of course, because she was very caring, also a bit dominant, but in a nice way. And my father was not the first responsible person for educating the children. It was all mother's work. It was the old-fashioned system. He was doing the work, and the main earner, of course, of the family, and she had their own responsibility. That was household and educating the children. But as a doctor, he was very important for me. He was a role model. His dedication to his work was quite important for me to choose for medicine later.
Tell us about your education. I know the educational system in Europe and the Netherlands is somewhat different than America, but tell us about your primary education, grade school and so forth, high school. Yes.
I think the elementary school is very much the same. My youngest son went to the first grade elementary school here in Boston, and it was excellent education, but basically the same as what we received. It was until 11 year. On the 12th, you went to what they would call junior high school here, and that you did that until you were 17, and then you had to choose. I was in a class of 11, and nine of the 11 chose to go into engineering studies. It was a very beta-like class, and mathematics was the hobby of that class. One went into to law because his law was the tradition in his family, and one went into medicine. That was I.
Huh. Now, you went to university looking towards medicine. Why did you choose medicine? What prompted that? Was that your father's influence, or?
Thing too, because I said already there was engineering was so popular in our class. So and you follow the crowd, and I thought, well, why don't I go into engineering as well? And I thought shipbuilding has not been done by one of the other class members, so I thought I'd take up shipbuilding. I had this enthusiasm already for water and for ships. But the shipping industry had already almost disappeared out of Holland. It was all
really
had gone away to Southeast Asia and to South America. So I didn't do that because I had to leave the country and Europe as a whole. And medicine came up as a second best.
Now you went to medical school in Utrecht in 1961.
Yes.
Was that?
My father had studied there.
Really?
Yeah.
So that was
tradition too.
a traditional
Yes.
sort of thing, and that's where you wanted to go.
Yes, yes. It's a very nice city.
And following medical school, you did an internship at Erasmus University in Rotterdam.
That's correct.
Tell us about the internship.
Rotterdam was totally different, devoid of tradition compared to Utrecht, and I think I was in a stage, perhaps I was a little bit rebellious. I said, well, away with traditions, I go to a modern city where they do it all over again. They had just established that university. It was all new, professors were young, and the way of teaching was quite stimulating. So that was a reason for me to go there, and also that my girlfriend was living there, and we had plans to marry, and we did that during internship.
Oh, okay. Now, was this a general internship, or was this an internship in surgery, or? Had you decided on surgery?
Internships were all rotating. You started with internal medicine, I think for 6 weeks, and then you went to gynecology, and then you went to ear and throat diseases, psychiatry, neurology. You had to take it all. Okay. Sometimes only 2 or 3 weeks, but that was internship. And the primary internships were internal medicine and surgery. Surgery took 8 weeks.
Had you decided on surgery at that point?
No, it came after my internship. I had a very good internship at St. Franciscus Hospital, and had stimulating and inspiring surgeons there.
Now, you did a residency in surgery in Rotterdam at a different hospital.
Yes, yes.
Where was that?
It was a good hospital, and the professor that was head of that department had a good reputation as a teacher. That was the reason. I preferred that hospital, and I was lucky that he took me.
Then, apparently in the middle of that, you did a visiting fellowship in vascular surgery at Utrecht. What prompted all that in Austria in '73?
Yes. The residency started in 1970,
right.
And I think already in at the end of the first year, perhaps the second year, I became quite interested in vascular surgery. The reasons were that I was reading in the journals a couple of very good review articles of Clem Darling that he wrote at that time in the New England Journal of Medicine. That gave a very easy to understand overview of vascular surgery, and it was written in a nice way. And I said, well, that's an interesting specialty. And then I started to read more about it, and I became, at that time, already interested in non-invasive measurements. And then I bumped upon the publication of a very young Dr. Yao, that he was in England at that time,
yes.
And he had established the ankle pressure measurements,
yes.
And something then I found I must replicate. I must see whether that is true, and I replicated all the ankle pressure measurements by going around the wards in the evening and make the same classification as James Young had been doing. And it all was in perfect agreement with each other. Each severity class of came out the same, and it was published in Dutch language in the Dutch Journal of Medicine, actually.
I'm glad we are in agreement. Thank you.
Yeah, suddenly, the next thing you know, you're a clinical vascular fellow at Mass General with
Clem
the
Darling.
famous Clem Darling.
Sheer
Now,
luck.
how did this happen?
Sheer luck.
Wow.
There were two main teachers in my training institution. That was Gerard Olthuis and Bob Kouwmans, both very experienced and good general surgeons. But Bob Kouwmans had done a research fellowship at the MGH, and he knew of my interest in vascular surgery. And at a trip back to Boston, he bothered to visit Clem Darling and recommended me, and that ultimately led to my clinical fellowship at Dr. Darling. I was sheer luck that he was the same person that made deep impression with his reviews. But it was.
So how was
no
that
reason.
year?
Excuse me?
How was the year?
The year was very interesting, of course. It was tiring because we were living in the suburbs. You had to get up very, very early, and had little time for sightseeing. But we have been back several times to see what really was going on in the touristic sector here.
But this was a good year for you.
Yes, it was. Yes,
Clinically.
quite stimulating. Yes, Dr. Darling really was a role model. He was quite enthusiastic about vascular surgery. He was an excellent clinician, which I admired a lot. And well, there was only a reason for me to pursue with vascular surgery.
Right. So
no
he
hesitation.
stimulated your
Oh yes.
studies and
Yeah.
training further.
Yes. Yes.
Now you went, which is a little bit confusing to me, now you are a rotating fellow in cardiac surgery.
Yes, for 4 months. That was just customary to do that for a while.
Okay.
And so
That was just customary. You weren't moving aside into cardiac surgery.
No, I found it quite interesting, but I still preferred at the end of the vascular surgical part.
Now, in 1978, you got your PhD in non-invasive testing.
Yes, that had to do with Jeff Rains. Jeff Rains was an engineer who
At MGH.
At NGH. He studied at MIT, and he invented the pulse volume recorder as a supplement of segmental limb pressure measurements.
Right.
And he made me enthusiastic, even more enthusiastic as I already was about non-invasive measurements. So I had I collected data there in the evenings also at the Mass General, and I thought this will come in due time. I go and make a PhD thesis of that, and it came to that 2 years later actually. So the thesis was defended in 1978 in Amsterdam.
So this was a very fruitful
Oh yes, it was.
time for you.
Absolutely, from the clinical experience, and at the same time I collected sufficient scientific data.
In your bio sketch, you said you had done 10 PhD theses.
Later, I
That's
also
a lot.
Yeah, no, that was supervised. That was supervised.
Supervised.
Yes, I initiated it.
Otherwise, you would get 10 PhD.
No. I thought of the project, and I tried to find funding, and I guided the persons.
Right, these are for others.
Yes. Those were
Let's-
pupils of mine. I
Let's-
didn't know that was some. You had to restrict that number of
Let's
lines in the.
let's leave your
sketch.
education for a moment and talk about your family and your personal life for just a moment. Now you were married during your training.
Yes. Yes.
And
I still have the same wife.
that's terrific.
Yeah, she accompanied me on this trip as she did many times before.
Well, that's wonderful. And you have some children.
Yes, 4 children. None of them went into medicine.
Well, that's fine, actually. That's fine. Now, to tell us about you. You were telling me before we started the interview that you do have a hobby
Yes, yeah, running.
of running.
Yeah, restricted to running, I must say. I would like to have more hobbies, but time is still a little bit reduced. I run mainly during the weekends. We have a weekend house at the coast. And in the dunes, all these sandy trails, that's ideal for running. I still work 2 days per week in private practice.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm involved in ablation of varicose veins. And since 6 months, we have set up an arterial outpatient clinic, which is interesting too, and it makes it a bit more exciting.
Now, let's talk a little bit, now that we've finished about your education and training, let's talk about the practice of vascular surgery. You became a consultant surgeon in the Department of Surgery in Rotterdam in 77 through 79.
Yes.
Then a consultant surgeon in the Department of Surgery.
Yes.
And head of the training program.
Of another hospital.
In another hospital.
Yes, in Catharina Hospital in Eindhoven.
Then the vascular surgeon in Rotterdam from 2009 to 2012. Now, you were in a private hospital, in a clinic. Now, this was not a government hospital. This is a private hospital.
Yes, yes.
In Rotterdam at The Hague from 2012 until the present time.
That was the private clinic, actually.
Right.
My retirement age was 65. That's compulsory retirement in the Netherlands. Hospital boards don't accept surgeons older than 65 for liability reasons, I suppose, when they become ill during an operation or whatever. So in 2009, I stopped with the work in the hospital, and then I went to the private clinics into Rotterdam and the Hague area.
Let's talk for a moment about some of the memberships and honors that you've been involved in. You have been an honorary member of SVS and a member of the advisory committee to the president of SVS from 2005 to 2010. You've been in the Dutch Medical Association, the Dutch Society for Surgery, and Dutch Society for Vascular Surgery, the Eastern Society for Vascular Surgery, Royal College of Surgeons of England, American Venous Forum, and on and on and on and on. Dr. Buth, your honors and accomplishments just go on and on.
Well, many of those are memberships. Those are not all committee memberships, actually. The Venous Forum and so on. That's a regular membership.
But it's clear to me that on top of massive publications, that you've had tremendous accomplishments. Could you tell us, in your opinion, how did this happen? Why did this happen to you?
Yeah, well, I think that's scientific interest and also part of hobby, partly hobby. Somebody has to do something in his spare time, and I like reading and trying young doctors to sort things out and try to bring over the spark that.
Why were you so successful, do you think?
Well, that's part of luck, I think. A little bit of perseverance, but I was quite lucky in the partners I had. First, my wife, of course, but also my colleagues with which I cooperated, and committee members.
Could you tell us perhaps some secrets about time management?
That was not intentionally managed, my time. When I don't have enough time, I make priorities, which is more important, that or that a piece of work or that article, and then I have not too much difficulties by dropping part of the lesser important work.
Okay, so you prioritize.
Yes.
Okay, that's a very good answer.
That's the good expression, the right expression, I think.
Let's talk for a moment about endovascular surgery.
Right.
How did you get so involved in this area? And where do you think it's headed?
I became really involved in endovascular surgery. Well, first, not straight away into the endovascular aneurysm repairs, but I understood in the early 90s that peripheral arterial work was going to be done, managed, and for much larger part by endovascular techniques than by open surgical techniques. So
Really?
I think so. Yes, I thought that. So I combined forces and made joint efforts with my interventional radiologist at my own hospital. I had thought out of protocols, discussed that with them, get them to agree, and they worked along certain lines. With regard to atherectomy, balloon angioplasty, Bass stenting and the superficial femoral artery and the iliac artery, and all these data were collected, and it was done in a structured way. It was done as a planned study. So we had different groups already planned beforehand, worked on it for 12 or 18 months, and then we had a series, and we could publish these series. So part of the PhD thesis that I initiated were of interventional radiologists. Actually, they did the work. I tried to structure that, and together we wrote a PhD thesis for those people.
But then you moved into more endovascular type.
Yes, to the stent grafts for aneurysms. That had to do, I think, with a time advantage we had in Europe. We were much quicker in introducing and rolling it out, the endovascular aneurysm treatment, as in America. For reasons that we all know, that's the strict regulatory environment.
FDA.
Yes. So in Europe, we had to look that it became much quicker a standard procedure, an accepted mainstream procedure. And in that early phase, when only a handful of centers were doing these procedures, I'm talking now about 1996, we united forces and we organized a meeting, first in Eindhoven and later in Liverpool in England, where my partner was. You cannot do these things alone, so I had a very good partner, my friend and colleague Peter Harris. I organized the Eurostar registry together, and we had these first meetings and got other centers interested in this voluntary registry. And this, when the first centers entered, then the ball began rolling, and many more centers started to contribute. And within no time, we had hundreds and later thousands of patients that were entered into first paper databases and later electronic databases. And that determined the success of the Eurostar voluntary registry. I can remember that the American colleagues were extremely interested in the project when the first reports were published as early as in 1998. When there was still great difficulties to introduce EVAR techniques here.
Right.
What's your final conclusion now, Eurostar?
The Eurostar we stopped. We said beforehand 10 years, and then probably our data, and then we have close to 10,000 patients in our list, use list to get more. It's the long-term results that count, and it is randomized trials. And against that time, we had also already randomized trials that had come out. Also, one of the first was from the Netherlands, and I was a contributor and a co-author on those papers. Those were the randomized trials. When those had come out, and it was in 1996, then I think the 3-year results had been published of those trials, we said, well, it's time to stop now. The registry is not worth the effort anymore.
Let me ask you another question related to all of these activities. Recognizing all your accomplishments, were you ever disappointed? Of course, every vascular surgeon faces disappointment in trying to reach for improvement in patients. I'm sure you faced failure from time to time. How did you respond? And the reason I'm asking this is, could you give young surgeons some advice here, please?
I think failure and disappointment will all be with us when making a career, and it's better to try to realize what went wrong and then try to forget to some point. You have to deal with it, actually. You have to leave it behind, because you said, well, it's good that it happened. I learned of it, and now it's time for another day and another project.
Can you talk for just a minute about some of your special interests? The stent graft for treatment of thoracic and abdominal aortic aneurysms.
Yeah.
I know that you have a list of things that you're particularly interested in, but could you give us a word about each of these special areas?
Well, I think we are going to think now about the future of vascular surgery, perhaps, or
Yes.
I think stent grafts will always be with us, and they will become better, but you have to fight against biological behavior of the aneurysms. They always will have the tendency to become a little bit wider on the top of on the bottom of the stent graft. So there will be much more redo procedures associated with stent grafts than with conventional surgery, where this doesn't play a role so much. On the other hand, it's aneurysms is a disease of the elderly, so many will die from other causes before the complications occur.
Small graft development.
It has been worked on so long, and it has been not successful. I think I believe rather in stem cell treatment and perhaps tissue culturing or other gene-based techniques. Maybe a breakthrough will come from there. But
soon?
Not very soon.
Graft surveillance?
Underestimated. I think there was a mistake from a certain article that was printed in circulation. We were too late with our correspondence. It had the wrong criteria, and it had the wrong outcome measures. So the conclusions were surveillance does not help. Graft surveillance does not help in improving the overall vein graft patency, and that was a wrong conclusion. They looked at outcome events like amputation in patients that were claudicants, and they looked at just a minor increase of the peak systolic velocity at the site of the restenosis, and said, well, see, these grafts will remain patent anyway, but they should have looked at a different criterion, and then they really occlude with restenosis. Intima hyperplasia is a nasty disease of vein grafts, and it should be detected by graft surveillance. But it's off the list of priorities in most institutions, so I don't think it will be soon that it will be on that list.
It can't be forgotten. What about intraoperative monitoring for carotid surgery?
I like that a lot, but most surgeons are not enthusiastic because it takes time, and carotid operation is meant to be done in short time, within an hour or so, and most people do not take the time for angioscopy, which I like a lot. And I'm not the only one. I have a famous British colleague, Ross Naylor. He's also an adept of angioscopy. You can see whether there are flaps, whether there are remaining thrombus in the operated area. So I like that intraoperative monitoring. I think that's the only one that's still valuable. The others have appeared were assessed and have appeared not very successful. But angioscopy is a good method.
Critical limb bypass surgery.
Bypass surgery.
For critical limb ischemia.
Yes. Still, in majority of cases, the preferable option, far above endovascular treatment for critical ischemia.
The non-invasive lab.
Is mainstream diagnostics in our hospitals that it should be, but it would be nice if there were some other breakthroughs with interesting techniques. But I think the duplex, the echo Doppler, the ultrasound Doppler contribution was great and is still mainstream, and I think that's the assessment that surgeons have.
The long-term result, you've spoken to this somewhat, the long-term result of the endovascular graft for treatment of aneurysms.
Yes. Are always less than open surgery, but good enough to survive and be a good solution for the majority of patients.
Jimmy?
Well, just a question about work hours. You know, the work hour in America now is 80 hours per week. What's the work hour in your country?
Working out is 48 hours.
48.
48. And
You think it's too
that's
low, or?
way too low, way too low. And now it coincides, it combines with shortening the duration, changing the curriculum of vascular surgical training. That is because of a new requirement, national requirement, and of the European administration requirement to make vascular surgical training shorter, 6 years altogether, common trunk combined, instead of the 8 years as it used to be. There's another factor that comes to it. The number of techniques that a surgeon needs to have has increased, has much greater variety with all these endovascular procedures. And now there is a relative scarcity of patients that are candidates for open procedures. So there are not enough open procedures to provide the necessary experience to vascular trainees.
We are having the same problem, is the decrease of the open procedure. And that is going to be a challenge for us.
Absolutely. And it can only be managed by either lengthening the training period or starting to separate an endovascular specialist within vascular surgery or an open specialist within vascular surgery. Then you will concentrate the cases to certain people that get the necessary experience in those particular cases.
Well, in our medical school admission classes, there have been a change in the demographic. There are a lot of female students, a lot of Asian or population that go into the medicine. How you handle the female? What percentage of the female?
A female is over 50%, close to 60%. In surgery it's less, but it's also catching up quickly. I think we have already 25, maybe 30% of our surgeons are female, and if they become pregnant, if they do that during traineeship, then they get, of course we are a female-friendly society, then they got this mother-friendly arrangements, but they lose a lot of exposure to the traineeships.
Do you have a policy, the national policy, how to handle all the female with a different way to support them? So
They are supported. They have a choice to work for 4 days instead of 5 days. Of course, they have leave for mothership, which is normal, I would say, but it all takes a toll.
At Northwestern, there's about 40 or 45% of female.
Yes,
It's a
overall, or in
tremendous-
surgery.
Yeah.
In surgery?
No, not surgery. I mean, and
Overall.
people go to medical school.
Yes, yes.
It's getting more and more.
Right, right. But I suppose surgery is different from most of the other specialties. Internal medicine or pediatrics or dermatology, that is relatively easier to combine it with getting a family and developing a family and raising a family.
Well, in Europe, you have the European Vascular Board examination. When you pass the board, does that mean that you can practice in all the European common market country, or can you go to London and start practicing?
Basically, yes. You have 2 certificates, and ideally, a surgeon should have both. To sit the European board examination, you need to have your national examination. You need to submit a copy of your CCST, your Certificate of Competence of Surgical Treatment, and a logbook. And then, so you have always a surgeon that has already passed his national traineeship and is certified nationally. And essentially, if you want to practice in your own country, you don't need a European certificate. But if you want to practice elsewhere, it's quite helpful. Although there are still some hurdles, but it helps a lot actually. And you are basically acknowledged to approved to work in that other country with that European certificate. I can tell you a bit more about the structure. You have a European Board of Vascular Surgery that has a committee of which I was the first secretary actually, and I was responsible for the first 4 years of vascular surgical board examinations in 1996, 97, 98 and 99. And in the hierarchy, that the European Board of Vascular Surgery is responsible to the UEMS section of vascular surgery. And that is responsible for all other things than the examinations. UEMS means European Union of Medical Specialists. So the vascular section is responsible again to the UEMS organization as a whole. Those are all specialties combined, and that's the body, the special body of the doctor's body that is responsible to the European administrators. That's the chain of hierarchy actually that exists.
In your vascular board exam, do you have oral and written component?
Yes. It's a day actually, so it is written. There is a multiple choice part, but it's mainly oral. It is an interview. It's cases that you have to discuss with 2 or 3 examiners, and nowadays there is also a simulator part. So you have to demonstrate what your endovascular skills are.
When you talk about simulator, do you use simulator for training or endo technique?
Absolutely, absolutely. Most simulators are made available by the industry. In Belgium and the Netherlands, most often the training facility is used of Abbott, that's in Brussels. And the education committee of the Dutch Vascular Surgical Society organizes 2 times per year workshops often 2 days workshops that go there and that practice on the simulators.
Do you like the simulator?
I think it serves a role. It should not be overrated, but if you have done it repeatedly, it will go a little bit quicker when you do it on a patient. You know the sequence of the movements.
The Journal of Vascular Surgery have a lot of articles from your country and from Europe. Is that JVS is your primary journal that you want to submit your article?
I think it is for many doctors that submit regularly articles, and for researchers and head of departments. The reason is partly pragmatic, because it has the higher impact factor, but partly also how visible will your article be? If it is in between the better studies, in between the larger series, your article comes out better. But having said that, the number 2 is the European Journal of Vascular and Endovascular Surgery, is an excellent runner-up. It has a very good editorship and has quite stimulating articles. So I think competition is a good thing. Both journals separately will improve by this competition.
Well, we think mentorship is very important. Can you name some your mentors?
Definitely, yes. I had a number of mentors that meant a lot for me, because of their personality, because that they were good doctors. The first one was my father. I told that already to Roger. He was a general practitioner in a small town, and he was a dedicated doctor, and he stimulated me a lot. And he didn't force me to go into medical school, but he certainly influenced my decision to go there. My teachers in surgery were Gerard Olthuis and Bob Kouwmans, and those were excellent surgeons that were important for me. I told already to Roger that Bob Kouwmans paved the way for my clinical fellowship at Clim Darling. And Dr. Darling himself was a stimulating example, quite enthusiastic about vascular surgery. So those were the people that counted most, I suppose, for my later decisions.
Well, the society SVS and ISCVS have merged together. So the international component, they kind of a little bit decreased. What do you think we should do to improve more international exchange between the United States and other countries?
And other countries.
You have any suggestion what we should do?
Yes. Well, you mentioned the ISVS, that's the International Society of Vascular Surgery. That's the one that was established 9 years ago by Frank Buth and Peter Bell. That's the one?
No, the one been for a long time. That with different chapter.
The cardiovascular.
Yeah, cardio.
Okay.
It merged with.
Yeah, you merged with the American Vascular Association. It was called. That was in 2003 or something. Yeah. Actually, at the time, I was not aware of the importance of that merge. Actually, but I recently read in the transcript of the presidential address of Peter Glowitsky that it had been a very good move, because the membership and the financial situation improved very much of the SVS. If you ask me whether these international societies will be all that important for international exchange of fellows, I'm not sure. The European Cardiovascular Society is not nearly as visible as its American counterpart, the North American chapter, was at that time. It's a society that's mainly known in the southern European countries, not so much in the north of Europe. And I think international exchange is is primarily a matter of individual acquaintances, friendships, agreements between the heads of departments in Europe and perhaps other continents and America. You can see that also when you look at the readership of the articles in the JVS, because these mixed authorships, you can make up that these were often joint ventures between different departments, with a junior of with a European name on the first authorship, and then quite a bit of American names, and then well, this is a joint venture-ship, and that's a regular returning thing.
Well, as we try to make some improvement on international relations, so they have the International Relations Committee, they have the international membership now.
Yes, yes.
And they also give out a visiting scholar for young surgeons to come to the meeting.
Right.
And I hope you, as a leader, will encourage the young guy to participate in this activity.
Yeah.
And they are also interested to develop chapters.
Right, right. Yeah, the international membership, how long does it exist? I was not aware of it, that it existed. Now I know I will certainly recommend it to my younger colleagues if I see them.
It occurs a couple of years now, the international membership.
Yeah, I need to do so, I promise. And the international scholarship you had also, I'm not aware. Of course, Holland is a small country, so if you have to compete for a scholarship, the chance is larger that it goes to an English or a French or a German trainee, because they have so many more trainees than we have.
You have any suggestion or opinion to give to young surgeons when they're starting now? What you want them to do? What would be your advice to them?
Well, in the first place, follow your heart. You should be become intrigued by vascular surgery. It should attract you. You really should look. Will I be happy with this particular specialty, or is another surgical specialty more for me? But if you are touched by the charm of and the benefits of vascular surgery and the rewards that you get from making patients better, then it is an excellent specialty, and I would everybody recommend it. And I certainly will recommend it to my grandchildren, I suppose, because my children haven't chosen to do so.
Roger?
Dr. Buth, thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It was great to
nice to talk to you.
to talk to you.